This is a brief presentation brought to you by Aid Medical on the Circle of Willis. This presentation is subtitled The Man on the Brain, which is the way I think about the Circle of Willis, and I'll explain more about this later. Here is the Circle of Willis labelled. We're going to take away these labels shortly and work through the structures. But before we do, here's a helpful way to remember how the Circle of Willis is structured. So you can think of Willis as a stick man or as an alien. I think of him as an alien because you'll notice off the top of his head are two antennae with those two little white dots on the top of them. And I just find thinking of him as an alien means I don't forget the antenna. But obviously being a stick man type alien, he also has two arms and two legs and a pair of ears as well. You might also notice that coming off of Willis's chin are another pair of arteries, and also coming out of his back, sort of kidney area, are another pair of arteries as well. Now I just remember they're there and I tend not to forget them, but if you find you're forgetting them because they don't fit with your stickman image, then maybe you could think of Willis as being a sort of four-armed, four-legged alien, or maybe as just a sort of spider-like alien with just 8 legs. But whatever works for you. I find this works for me, but just find an image that you find helpful. So that's Willis, the alien. And here you can see why I refer to Willis as the man on the brain, because he really does look like a stick man on the brain. You can see his head there resting on the cerebrum, his back slouched over the pons, and his legs sort of dangling down the vertebral column. If you remember that is how he is positioned, back on the pons, head on the cerebrum, legs on the vertebral column, that's quite helpful because that will help you remember what each part of Willis is named and also what each part of Willis actually supplies in terms of blood supply. So the two images, Willis as a stick man alien and Willis as a man on the brain, are really the two sort of memory aids I'm really offering you to help you sort of remember this. So there's Willis again, and here he is labelled. So we're going to turn the lights out now just to take away the labelling, and we're going to start with our first structure, which is the circulus arteriosus, or the actual Circle of Willis, which makes up Willis's head. Now this circle functions as a sort of insurance policy for the brain, and by that I mean if any of the arteries that you can see feeding in and out of this circle are for some reason partially or fully occluded, the idea is that the remaining vessels would continue to feed into the Circle of Willis, and the unoccluded vessels would continue feeding out of the Circle of Willis, and so the brain would be supplied with a collateral circulation, or an alternative blood supply that would minimise ischemia in the event of a partial occlusion of any one vessel. So that's Willis's head. Now off of Willis's head come 3 pairs of arteries, here, here and here. And these 3 pairs of arteries all supply the cerebrum, and they're helpfully named the anterior cerebral arteries. So the anterior cerebral arteries are Willis's antenna anterior. These 2 vessels coming off the middle part of Willis's head are the middle cerebral arteries, and these 2 remaining arteries are the posterior cerebral arteries. So there are 3 pairs of arteries supplying the cerebrum. Then coming off the internal part of the circle, forming Willis's eyes, are the internal carotid arteries. So internal to the circle, internal carotids. Now moving down from Willis's head, we obviously have his back, and his back is the basilar artery, back basilar. Now you might remember from our man on the brain image that Willis's back is resting on the pons, and so these smaller arteries coming off of Willis's back are the pontine arteries. Moving down from his back, we have Willis's legs, or an upside down V. V for vertebral arteries. These are the vertebral arteries, and in between his legs we have a structure connecting the 2 legs, which makes our inverted V look a bit like the letter A. anterior spinal arteries. So that's how we can remember this vessel, the anterior spinal artery. Moving up now, we have 3 more pairs of vessels that we've missed. Now you might remember that there were 3 vessels, or 3 pairs of vessels that supplied the cerebrum. Now there are also 3 pairs of vessels that supply the cerebellum, or the small brain, and these are broken down into the superior cerebellar arteries, which are these 2 structures, and the inferior cerebellar arteries, which are these 2 and these 2 vessels. Now these first 2 are known as the anterior inferior cerebellar arteries, and these last 2 are known as the posterior inferior cerebellar arteries. So that's 3 vessels off of Willis's head that we've covered already, supplying the cerebrum, and 3 vessels off of Willis's back and legs that supply the cerebellum. So that brings us to a close really on our Circle of Willis presentation on the man on the brain, and here's a brief slide just to recap. Thank you for watching, and this presentation was brought to you by Aid Medical, medical education for free, as it should be.